The PTB for the Course of Sin chapter has arrived, and yet I find myself only mildly interested in the PTB as a whole. Perhaps it's because this PTB was released early before the public was given full access to it, or perhaps it's because this chapter is a community voted chapter, which allowed for the Killer's Power and all of the new perks to be known well in advance of the PTB itself. The Killer's Power is certainly intriguing to use and a fun challenge, but the actual usage of this power itself has some heavy pros and cons to say the least. And the new perks for both Killer and Survivor are mediocre at best, but I suppose there's at least a few interesting build ideas that are possible. In short though, none of the new perks are overly game-changing to the meta. And speaking of game-changing to the meta, thankfully there are some perk changes in this patch. The nerfs to Thrill of the Hunt and Sprint Burst and the buffs to Nurse's Calling and Moment of Glory are the most notable perk changes from my perspective. However, most of the changes were done so small that you'll probably need a magnifying glass to even spot the difference. Putting aside all of the actual gameplay changes in this patch though, there are some major UX changes that also appeared in this PTB, and I do believe they are very important to highlight. The UX in DBD has had its ups and downs over the years, and some of the UX changes in this patch are things that will impact everyone for the foreseeable future. The new gameplay showcase section, as well as the updated power tooltip, are positive steps in bridging the gap between new players and veteran players. These are both long-awaited changes that will make it easier for new and casual players to learn the basics of each killer power. The other majorly positive UX change is the hook timer division. For the last decade, players have been left on their own to figure out how close a survivor is to reaching the second hook stage, but now the hook timer has been split into 2 bars, which will make it much easier to recognize when a survivor is about to hit the second hook stage. It's kind of incredible that it took 10 years for something like this to be implemented, but I'm not complaining as it's a fantastic quality of life change. The last major UX change though is a bizarrely different experience from the others. For some unexplained reason, the matchmaking button was updated with a new look, and it's certainly a sight to behold. Unexplained random changes like this one have happened on a fairly routine basis throughout DBD's history, so it wasn't all that surprising to see something small like this be changed. However, I'm not exactly sure who was even asking for the matchmaking button to be updated, and I'm also not entirely sure how this update was viewed as an improvement. In my humble opinion, the update to the matchmaking button is head-scratching to say the least, and the issues with the new matchmaking button are not all based on the updated visuals. Before diving into the changes made to the matchmaking button, it's important to get a quick understanding of what changes the matchmaking button has received over the years. The good news is that the matchmaking button has received very few major changes. In 2016, the matchmaking button used to be a simple button that said ready, and that was it. The button was updated by 2017 though, with it being changed from saying ready to join the lobby. But this was short-lived, as by late 2018 the button was changed back to saying ready. The matchmaking button remained this way for almost 5 years, but then the button was finally updated again in the first half of 2023, with it now saying play instead of ready. And outside of words being changed, the overall visual layout of the matchmaking button has remained pretty consistent over the last 10 years as well. But now flash forward to the PTB for patch 10.1, and here's what the matchmaking button looks like. It's a bit startling to see at first, especially because this is the most amount of changes the matchmaking button has ever received. While there is one small positive change for the updated button, the rest of the changes are not all that great. First and foremost, the updated button looks clunky and not very organic to the standard lobby screen. For some strange reason, a red and black rectangle was added as a background to the new button. This rectangle almost feels like a placeholder for something else, as it doesn't really gel with the rest of the UI. And not only does this rectangle take up slightly more space on the screen, it's also made the tally mark worse to look at. Essentially, because the tally mark turns red when the matchmaking button is clicked, the red tally mark then clashes with the red in the rectangle. Overall, the visual appearance of the matchmaking button feels like a big downgrade. But the visuals of this button update are not the only issue. In fact, the biggest negative of this button is that there's no sound notification that plays when you click the play or ready button. Here's an example of the sound notification that plays in the live version of the game. And here's what happens in the PTB. The sound notification that plays in the live version of the game is a simple and effective way to communicate to the player that the button was pressed. Additionally, this noise is super convenient, as it makes it so that a player doesn't even have to look at the matchmaking button to check if it was clicked. You can click the button and then do something else. But now with the updated matchmaking button, the lack of noise makes it difficult to recognize if the button was actually clicked. The only noise that does play sounds like something you'd hear if you misclick in the blood web or something, so it can actually be even more misleading. I have absolutely no idea as to why this sound notification was removed. Did someone on the dev team think the noise was annoying or something? I'm genuinely at a loss. The one small positive thing about this updated matchmaking button is that it does display the amount of time spent waiting to join a lobby. However, the button is also meant to display the estimated wait time as well, which it was not doing during this PTB, even though it was clearly noted in the patch notes that it should display both times. Now, the obvious explanation as to why this was not working as intended is probably because it's a bug of some kind. However, I do find it a little strange that something like this would be overlooked for the PTB. My current theory as to why the matchmaking button was updated involves another UX change. Basically, because the gameplay showcase section was added directly next to the matchmaking button, I'm led to believe that the devs felt compelled to update the matchmaking button while they were messing with that area of the screen. The decisions behind the specific changes that were made to the matchmaking button, though, I cannot explain. All in all, I can see what the devs were attempting to go for with this updated matchmaking button, keyword being attempted. The goal with the updated matchmaking button appears to have been to condense the information into a clearly defined section of the screen. However, the end result is a bit jarring to say the least. And most of all, the removal of the sound notification is a wild choice all on its own. I can understand a visual change to a certain extent, but the removal of the sound notification is so unnecessary. And while yes, new changes like this can take time to adjust to, this change is not something that may get better with time. This is the PTB, so these changes could be updated by the time this patch goes live. Just thought I'd throw that out there in case, someone sees this after this goes live and it doesn't look the same and I'm complaining about something that seems very weird. I'm curious if anyone else finds this change to be a downgrade as much as I have, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. But that's pretty much all I have for now though. Thanks for watching.